Hey, Christy Mattoon here with Mind Rewire. I have a special guest today. I'm super, super excited to introduce you. Her name is Zerina Zartucci, and she is a somatic intuitive. And we've been friends for a while. And she called me the other day and told me this story that I just wanted to share with you. And I want her to share it with you because it just blew my mind, first of all, and how it all kind of unfolded. But first, Zerina, hi, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always excited to have fun discussions about spirituality with one of my best friends. So,
Might as well share it with everybody. Can you tell us for a second about somatic intuitiveness? What is a somatic intuitive?
sure. I kind of took varying phrases and put them together because to me, especially as women, we have a lot of ability to have intuition through our feeling, right? What I experience is kind of taking that and amplifying it to a slightly different level. And really, it's my body's both internal sensory and physical response to vibrations and energy and information that I would say is in a field, whether it's my field, someone else's field, a field I encounter. So when I sit down and I talk to someone, like you, for instance, and you ask me to check on someone, or you ask me to feel into a decision, right? That each of those things has their own field, and so essentially, I'm using my ability to feel that out and taking, and my body is actually responding to that sensory information as I present questions to it, as I present ideas, overlaying both fields. So, for instance, is X true, right? And how does my body will respond, yes or no, very similar to a muscle test response as to whether there is enough energy there to confirm that that is true. That makes sense.
It makes sense to me because I've seen it in
I
action.
know. Well, maybe you should explain it.
But I wanted it from your voice because I just think it's always so interesting how we explain our own abilities and capabilities and how somebody else might perceive them. So I've had the pleasure of working a few times with Zerina on that level of what she does, and a few times actually, she's checked into spirits for me, the nature of a spiritual of a person, I guess I would say. So when my brother passed, he actually showed up with Zerina and just let me know he was okay. Basically, it was the craziest, coolest conversation I think I've had in a while, and there was a few others too. And then even sitting in a room where we did our I can't even think of the name of it right now. We did a group
Yeah, we did our Sacred Rebel event together.
sacred revel event, right? And that was fascinating because when things would just show up in the room, you could tell instantly whether we were on a good track or not because Zarina would do this little muscle test. Her whole body would just like, and so it was a really good confirmation of things. And I've never seen anybody operate quite the way that you do in that regard. So it's fascinating, and the energy it fills in a room is palpable when you're sitting there with a group of people, and all of a sudden you get that confirmation. Everybody's energy just soars. So I thank you for sharing that with all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a special thing. I'm very grateful to, to Spirit and to my team that they've helped me kind of hone that tool over the last probably 4 or 5 years. And what I found actually is that being in a space with somebody who sees it, understands it, and trusts it, they can actually adapt their system to be able to do it.
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah, and so I've had people who will be talking, and we'll be, exploring an idea. Instead of me shaking, they'll actually shake, right? And I had one friend who was so supportive, so, in tune, and she was someone who could see angels and could see guides like I see you, which I always, envied, and she envied my ability to shake test things, and she ended up honing that ability and being able to do it herself. I
Wow.
have family members who didn't know what that was, had never really seen me do it in its full-fledged and know what it was, and now they shake when they're very connected to spirit. So it's been an interesting thing to watch evolve.
That's very cool. I don't think I ever picked up your shake, but I see and sense and do a lot of my own end of it. And the shake part, I don't think ever happened, but just knowing, I mean, I could almost intuit when you were about to shake, it got so strong. So it was very interesting. I know the
Which I
whole thing
think
was,
is cool because you can see the validity of what's happening physically on another level, right? In a way that I'm not seeing it. So together they support each other, which I
yeah,
think is
really powerful, really, really powerful. Yeah, the spirit moving in that regard to me is just such a cool, they just like solidifies everything. It makes it real what we do, and it makes it more, I don't even have the right words for it. I'm just always in awe when I see people like you show up, and it solidifies in my own head what I do more. It makes what I do real. So I appreciate people like you coming into my life.
definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted Zerina on here today. I really wanted her to tell you about her trip to the UK. She had a really cool thing happen that was unintentionally a surrender. Like you just had to full on surrender to this project. And so I'm going to just turn it over to you and let you tell us this story.
Yeah, so I mean, anybody who knows me knows that I tend to be a busy person, kind of running from place to place. And I'm somebody who will, if I don't see the need for it, I'll kind of toss things out. So I had, and not address them. So I had, for instance, signed up to do this tour, right? A friend of me had presented this idea. Hey, we're going to go, I'm going to take this tour in Glastonbury. We're going to get to see all these cool sacred sites. I'm a religious studies major, so I really enjoy like the history and the way people approach the divine from all these different aspects. And so that was like, oh, so exciting to me, right? I signed up. This was way back in the beginning of the year, and I thought I was signing up for like you get on the bus and you know caravan to one side and the next side and the next side, right? And it had a Facebook group and it had all these things, and I realized that the woman who led it just was fantastic. That she was very mystical, and she had her own you know business in helping consciousness grow and up level. And so I knew that I was going to get a very you know kind of spiritual version of the tour, but it didn't quite occur to me what I was really getting myself into. And because I said, well, I don't have time for the Facebook group, like I didn't look at any of her posts, her emails, I only looked at the ones I had to, right? Like, what are your dietary restrictions? not, not what's on the agenda and what are you actually going to see? I'm like, well, the agenda is the agenda. You know, when I get there, I'm going to see all those things anyway. I'm not going to get to change based on if I read it or not. So I'm just going to show up, right? So I didn't, all the opportunities I could have had to understand what I was really getting into, like I just naturally siphoned out, right? And I get there and they say, okay, well, we're going to have dinner together as a group. There's about 12 women. And then we're going to do opening circle. And I'm like, opening circle, that's unusual, you know, for like a bus tour, right? I'm like, okay, well, you know, maybe it's kind of somewhere in between because, you know, she is who she is, the woman who's the facilitator. And we sit down and she goes through the full list of everything that we're going to see. And this list, every time she said a different site, it was like I was hit with this energy and it just touched my heart so much. And at the end, we went around, everybody had to say their piece. And when I got to me, I just expressed to her and them that I did not realize that what I had actually joined was more of a goddess retreat or spiritual workshop or, you know, this really in-depth retreat to like
So you really thought you were going on a bus tour and you were going to go into a building, look at stuff, and leave and go to another place and do the same thing all over again.
yeah, like I thought that, you know, that she was giving us this kind of standard tour and she just happened to be a really cool tour guide, you know? Like that's really what I thought. And actually what I had signed up for was every day meditating, every day being in circle, every day a little bit of maybe yoga or movement or something like that. Every day seeing one big sacred site and doing rituals to tap into the energy of those sites.
Oh, wow.
And then every day, either a smaller site or like a smaller event. So one of the events was we had they're in Glastonbury. They have a goddess temple, right? And the goddess temple are the priestesses of Avalon, which Avalon, it overlaps Glastonbury, right? It's the multi-dimensional location in Glastonbury. And so we had a night where the priestesses welcomed us one by one into their temple, and they did this light worker ceremony where they have a candle that's been, the flame it's one of the eternal flames, right? It's always being lit, and it was connected to several other flames that have, like, for instance, the Dalai Lama's flame had been merged with that flame at some point, right?
Wow.
And so what she did is she gave us tea lights, and we all got to merge flames and then take our tea lights home. So we essentially were taking the light home, and it was this reminder for us to be light bearers in the world, right? So this is one instance, one night of 7 or 8 days, and it was this big, beautiful, lovely moment. And so I look at it, and it was days of that, right? Like one right after the other each day, and I'm like, this is so not what I thought I was signing up for. And everybody in the group in opening circle, laughed, and because they couldn't believe that this had happened. And I said, what's funny about this is that as we're going through the list of all the things we're going to see, I can see in my life where there's pieces that have led me to this moment, both from as early as being 12 years old, right, all the way up to the last 6 months, and someone coming in my life who is very adept at Hermetic principles and the way that, like, Egyptian symbology overlaps with Christian symbology, overlaps with alchemy and the idea of the masculine and feminine union, right? And what, that union, how powerful it is, all of those things, the Kundalini yoga, the full body intuition, right? Like everything, all of those pieces laid out and both celebrated and amplified by each of these sacred sites. And I'm going, I couldn't have planned this if I wanted to, and if I had tried, I probably would have ended up with a much, lesser version, less impactful, less meaningful. It was amazing. And at the end we joked, as a group, they now understood what a indirect path my path has been, and now I think through that process, that's like the final leg of me really understanding that, spirit is leading in a way that will help me get there, right? Without me having to push, having to try, having to create, having to say, like, it's going to be this way and I'm going to go that way, which I want to do. Like my brain, I'm an Aries. My brain wants to say, we're taking a path and we're going this way, right? And every time I try and do that, it's like I'm fighting the wheel.
Yeah.
And I was getting frustrated before I went on this trip. Like, I keep fighting the wheel. I keep fighting the wheel. Why isn't the wheel turning?
What I want to bring up too, you had told me about how you thought your date to leave was a certain date, and then because of this trip, you all of a sudden realized, and you only had 10 days to plan or something to get yourself ready, and you thought you had a month left to go because planned this thing into it. So being able to move and shift, and the spirit was just right there with you, getting you prepared and moving you.
Yeah, I had the trip had started on one day. The tour had started on one day, like towards the end of August. But I had actually added on, 2 weeks plus to the front of the trip. But in my head, I kept thinking, oh, at the end of August, I'm doing this. At the end of August, I'm doing this. Oh, okay, it's coming, right? I'm in July. It's coming. I've got about, a month, or a month and a half, right? And then I get to the end of July, and I'm like, oh, I still have about a month, right? Because I'm at the end of July. And really, I only had 2 weeks because I had added on 2 weeks to go see friends of mine, and I went, oh my God, I'm leaving actually in 10 days. I'm not leaving in a month. Um,
Well, you know, the whole thing just brings to mind like the idea of surrender and how you just are able to let go, and whatever, however that shows up, wherever you're led, you're moving into it. How does that feel for you?
well, I mean, I'll say even in the pieces that weren't finished planning, because I'd gotten to the point where I was, 10 days out, and there were things that hadn't been sorted yet. How was I going to get to Glastonbury? Which train was I going to take
You
from Cardiff
didn't
to
even have that
Manchester?
part.
No, I didn't, I didn't have all those pieces figured out yet. And I knew some of those pieces, it would be fine to figure out when I got there. I just, some people would need to have that nailed down, right? And I just accepted that I had to leave, and none of that stuff was done. I accepted that I had to leave, and work wasn't all situated the way that I wanted. And I just trusted that it was going to figure itself out along the way. And for the most part, you know what, it really did. There were places and times where I could have said, you know what, it doesn't make sense for me to go. I should just cancel this trip. Whether it's family or money or work or whatever. Like, I could have made a reason to not go, and I thought about it, right? I thought about it several times because it just showed up so fast. And every time I tapped in, it was like, no, go. Like, we got this, go. I mean, very specifically, I remember one day, like in meditation, it was like somebody kissed me on my forehead, and what I heard was, we'll take care of you, daughter. And I
Wow.
was like, wow. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, I'm not going to worry. I'm just going to show up. And feeling how guided that whole process of getting me there was, making sure I was there, the culmination of so much learning all coming together. And I don't even think I have the full understanding of what that's going to mean moving forward. But now I understand. There was a piece of me before that was wondering, what's going to happen next? Who am I going to be? What am I becoming? Where is this going? And now I'm at this place where, like, oh, it's happening. I'm just watching it happen. And I have the pieces I have right now. There's a settledness that came from this trip that I can't explain.
That's
Where
beautiful.
I know I have the pieces. I know I'm in the becoming. And I know that I say the 200 feet, right? To me, like when you're driving a car, there's 200 feet of light you can see at night, right? You don't know what's around the bend, but you have the 200 feet. I'm like, okay, I have my 200 feet. I can walk in the light that I have, right? And I'm trusting that the rest of the road, the rest of the light will be given as I need it.
Yeah, because every time you roll a little bit further forward, if you take that idea of the 200 feet, it just keeps extending in front of you. You never have to even really question if it's going to be there. It's just going to what's going to be in the light once the light illuminates it.
But you have to walk in the light you have, otherwise you don't get the next 200 feet, right? Because you have to literally, in the car analogy, move forward to
Yeah,
see what's next.
yeah. And that's the listening and just participating and being in the spirit.
Yeah. And as much as I think, in spiritual circles, we talk about the difference between the unknown and the known. When it becomes practically applied in your life, it's a much more difficult concept to walk into the unknown, or the layers of the unknown, right? So maybe I know it's supposed to be this, but I don't know exactly what color it's supposed to be and how it's supposed to look and what time it's supposed to be there, and you know what I mean, and all of those things. And so you can still let those small pieces of unknown trip you up along the way, right? And if you don't own the little bit of light that you were given, right, it's not going to manifest.
Can you give us a little bit of practical advice for people that are just starting their journey or just like really beginning to become aware and start to recognize that there's more to all of this than they maybe have previously known? Can you give us a little practical advice at how to see the light, how to get into the light, or how to know that you're in that zone of the light?
To me, the light has a lot of meaning. So one meaning is The light that I know is my deep knowing that this is true and solid. So it's like that yes. You know, when you talk about feeling into like what is your vibrational yes in your body, right? To me, that's part of that is the light that I talk about.
Agree.
In addition to that, I think the light is a space, right, where information can come into that space, and it gives you insight, right? So some people would call that your intuition. Some people would call that an experience of God. For somebody, it might be walking into the garden and looking at a plant and realizing the essence that's in the plant, and actually taking its leaves and petting its leaves, because you realize what a beautiful, alive creature that God is shining through in front of you, right? And that would be standing in the light that you have. So it can apply in a lot of ways. I think for somebody who's starting, I'll tell you, one of the things I did early on is I would just, if you know that you have a belief in God or in something that's bigger than us, and you identify that that belief holds a way to interact with you, then I would say interact with it, even if it doesn't make sense, right? So like what I would do is I, on a deep level, I'd say, okay, God, I don't know what to do right now. You know, I don't know what is supposed to happen, but I'm here and I'm willing. Please help me. Show me, right? Show me where I should be. Show me where to take the next step. On a more fun level, it would be something like, I want to be so sure of you, right? And your presence in everything. Please, like, pour out of everything that I come in contact with. As a very young child, my grandmother taught me this, and it wasn't until recently I truly understood how profound it was. She said, you can do this anytime, but if you're scared and you're going into a meeting, or you have to go to something that it's important, then what I want you to do is I want you to pray. And I want you to say that that you are asking the Holy Spirit to do it with you, as you, and for you. And that whoever you come in contact with, whatever you come in contact with, that the Christ within them will rise up to greet you. And in turn, the Christ within you is going to rise up to greet them. And then any interaction that you have is blessed. Wow. And I would do this as a little kid. And as an adult, I realized how meaningful that really was, and how that can completely change your experience in a day, and with anyone.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I'd say that's a really easy thing, you know.
You know, I don't think a lot of times we even realize the Christ in somebody else, or we don't even realize spirit in somebody else. We're so concerned with our own being, especially you're talking about walking into a fearful thing or something, a meeting or whatever the thing is, and you're so consumed with whatever is in front of you or whatever you're feeling inside yourself, especially if it's negative, you just forget to even realize that light and that better half. That's a really cool little exercise.
Yeah, and what I realized too is by doing that and asking for it in yourself, you ask to not respond from a place of fear, from a place of anxiety, from a place of hurt, from a place of you know, an unstable place, let's say. And so you bless them and you bless you. And so you make the interaction, you kind of up-level the interaction, right?
Well, and I think all the time, if you're coming from that Christ-centered space, or you're coming from Christ consciousness, or, you know, however you call it out there, whatever you call it for you, that higher vibration always trumps fear. It always will. You can't be in fear if you're looking at somebody through God's eyes, or you're looking for God's eyes in somebody. It always beats that stuff. So you can't be in that fear, that anxiety anyway.
But we're human, and things happen, and we worry, right? And so I think it's the being able to step back and be the observer of yourself, right? People talk about this a lot, but I think the more you do it, the less it feels like that, because you've just gotten so used to doing it. But being able to step away from the emotion and what's happening, and look at it objectively and say, I recognize that I feel this way right now.
Yeah.
But I'm asking for help. Like, I'm asking that you bless this and you bless me so that the best in me, the highest level of consciousness in me, can be operating right now.
Right.
Right?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So when I'm working with people, literally the training part of what we're doing with that kind of a situation is finding the feeling to it. So that when you're speaking those words in the inhale, you're just like pulling that big feeling inside of you. And it's almost like you're training, well, you are training yourself to be in that state instead of allowing yourself, and we are human. So, I mean, the other obviously happens, fear and panic and all those things, but they're not supposed to stay in your system over the long haul. And I think when you train that feeling and you get used to asking for that help or summoning that help to you, it just becomes an automatic way of being. And it sounds like you've been doing that for a very, very long time.
Before I even knew what I was really doing, which I think is magical. Now I look at her and I think, what are all the other magical things you taught me that I haven't even realized yet?
Oh, wow. Wow. That's an interesting question. That's incredible. Well, I am excited that you're back in our country because I miss talking to you. If you could leave us with like one really magical moment from your journey that just like really stood out for you that you don't mind sharing, can you give us one?
Yeah. So if for someone who's never been to Glastonbury and doesn't fully understand Avalon, that area is ripe with reverence for the divine feminine and for the goddess, right? The goddess aspect of what I personally call God. And so there are a lot of places where that is celebrated and where that power really comes through. One of the places for me that was most impactful was the Chalice Wells. It was there's two springs. One's a white spring and one's a red spring, and they're essentially supposed to represent the two serpents that come together, and like the Kundalini and the marriage of the divine feminine and masculine. And the water comes out from underneath the Tor, and the Tor is this top of the hill, and it's one of the places in Avalon where it would be above water. So if you go back to when Avalon was before Glastonbury, when it was believed to be there, it was surrounded by water, right, and mist, right, hence the book. And so you'd have to ferry to get to it. So the Tor is one place that was above water at that time, and the Tor is deeply connected to Hermetic principles and this idea of transformation, because it was the place where when souls passed away that they would come to in order to get transitioned to go into, the underworld or their next stage of life or whatever, right? So it's this big transition point. So these waters flow under this powerful transition point and then out and separate. And one turns red and one turns white. The white one is underground. So there are these caverns that you go into. And I was struck when I walked in because at the very back of the center cavern, the way the water fell on the wall, it actually created the shape of the goddess, which looked to me, because of my background, like Mary in her mantle, right?
Oh, wow.
And I was just overwhelmed. And it was interesting because no one was going in that pool. So there were separate pools, right? There was the back one against the wall, there was a front one, and there were side pools. And they didn't say you couldn't. So of course me, I'm like, that's the one I want to be in. And you couldn't tell if there was floor or not, right? Because it's so dark, you're in the cavern, it's water, like it just looks black. So, I'm staring at this girl next to me and she's like, I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, I have to, I have to know, so I kind of go backwards and I'm totally in fear, right? Of like, what's below me? Nobody's in here. There could be anything in here. Nobody ever comes in here. And then right when I'm like, maybe I shouldn't, my foot hits the floor and I stand up. I'm like, okay, this is fine,
Oh, how funny.
It's just like one of those moments, that makes you laugh and look at the rest of your life. But
And look at the rest of your life. Oh my.
But what happened is I had this sense like I needed to, I don't know, I just knew that I needed to lay my back against that wall where she had shown herself to me and feel her. And so I did. So I got into the pool, I walked to the back wall, I leaned against it. And I didn't tell anybody what I was doing, but what was interesting is the minute I did it, I could feel her. And all of a sudden, like 5 people turned around and they're like, oh my God. And so then I'm like scared and I open my eyes, I'm like, what? And they're like, that's you. Like, that's you. You're like, and they, I don't know if they couldn't see the outline until I stood there, but once I stood there, they could see her.
It illuminated.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then it became more powerful. And I just stood there, you know, feeling the vibration for a moment and resting into it. And having this feeling like I was going to take her with me. And it was funny because in that moment, I knew she's always been with me. It's why I saw it. It's why I felt it. It's why I needed to be there. But it was like, now I'm going to take the awareness of that with me home. And that was amazing. And so then after that, I baptized myself. I went under the water completely and I came back out and I said, okay, well, this is what we're going to do.
Wow. So, oh my.
Yeah, I would say that was the place that meant the most.
Wow. It'll be interesting to see how that manifests in the upcoming years of your life.
Definitely. You know, it's funny because Mother Mary has always been a huge influence on my life. I'm Hispanic, but my grandmother had an experience of her as a child when she lost her mother. So I was raised with this reverence for her. As an adult, I've grown to have my own connection with the Magdalene, both of which have a representation of the rose, right? And through, you know, religious studies and a bunch of other things, I became really passionate about this idea of the feminine, the way the feminine shows up in religion, how she's held sacred or not, and the way her sexuality impacts that, right? And so as I've, you know, left Glastonbury and I am gravitating more and more to the Magdalene and this idea of the rose, I'm seeing all these reminders about how the rose is a representation of feminine sexuality and is used as a representation in so many religions. And I'm just sitting with it, but I'm interested to see how it's going to manifest itself, because I think just in the experience I've had with women in the last 2 weeks, that there are many women who don't have a space where they feel comfortable even discussing their sexuality, much less looking at it from a place of it being sacred on a very, you know, householder level. I think there are women who, like, this is what they do, and they go and they have that experience and they chase it. But on an everyday person level, right? Somebody who's not deep in this work, there isn't a space for women to really explore that, right? And what it means to them, and what they want that relationship to be, because it is a relationship. Like, if I think about my sexuality as another person, she has her own personality. Do you know what I'm saying?
I even want to use, Zerina, I think sometimes the confusion between sexuality and this whole idea and spirit that you're talking about gets really muddled with just sex.
It does. And they're obviously connected, but they're not the same.
Right.
Definitely.
And I think that can really, and I think in the United States, there is such a weird, and I don't know, maybe it's all over the world and I'm just very short-sighted because I've not really been out of this country, but I think there's such a huge issue with the female and sex and the lack of sexuality, the lack of our honoring ourselves and our bodies and who we are as a being and as a sexual being and as a feminine being.
As a feminine being, right? Which I mean, sex is deeply, sex is a part of everybody's existence, but I think it hits us in a different way simply because the result of it can be creation, right? And that lives and breathes and grows within us. And so it's a different relationship. And I think part of that is why it's been regarded differently in different religions, throughout history. I was reading just actually yesterday about the way that the rose was tried to be desecrated for a period of time. And so instead what they did with it, because it had been in these non-Christian themes, they took the rose and they made the whores wear it. They made prostitutes wear it as a badge that they were prostitutes, right? Like as a badge of disgrace, let's say. But because the rose had been revered for so many centuries, like it's argued to be one of the first species of flowers that existed on the earth, right? They couldn't beat that out. They couldn't beat the sacred out of the rose, and so the rose ended up being adopted by the Catholic Church, right?
Oh,
and so,
wow.
I had to be fair. I haven't verified the source that I got that from, but I thought it was very interesting.
So it's kind of scary to me with the feminine uprising, and uprising is probably a bad word for that. I'll get slapped down for that word, but like so many strong feminine figures are standing up, but it's with the idea of squashing down the masculine. And I think there's got to be a balance somewhere in there. Can you speak to that for a second? Because I don't think the feminine is supposed to be like a stronger overall. Am I making sense?
You are, yeah, you are. So I would agree with you. There has been, at least especially in our circles, there has been this movement of the feminine, right? In 3D versions, the feminist, right? These feminist movements and marches, in more of the spiritual circles, this revering of the divine feminine and needing to bring back the divine feminine and all of those things. So what I think, is important, like you said, is the balance, because what happens is when we're not tapped into that aspect of us, when there isn't a reverence on something, right? You have to take a concentrated effort to be able to address it, re-enliven it, right? Give it energy, give it attention. But that's not to say that you lose the rest of yourself. Right. And so, people ask me, because I'm a proponent of feminine empowerment, definitely. But more, I look at it from a self-empowerment perspective, not from an outside perspective. Right. And so they asked me, did you go to marches? And I said, I didn't go to marches. And one of the reasons is because there were places where I thought that it was skewed, and I couldn't get behind an idea of empowering the feminine while disempowering the masculine.
Yep.
Right. And so, I think there are systems and things in place that probably, need to be addressed from a societal 3D perspective, but I'm going to put that aside for a second. From a spiritual perspective, the goal is for both of us, like both sides of us, to be whole, so that then we, as an embodied version of masculine or feminine, from a chosen, who we want to show up in the world as place, that we can then unite physically as the masculine and feminine in balance. But the balance happens internal first, right? And for some women and for some men, they feel like they've shut down what is the feminine aspects of who they are, or that they've given them less priority. And so it's an important process for them to look at those pieces and give them attention and re-energize them and give them, love and time, and do all of the feminine practices and goddess work. So I don't discredit that in any way, because it's important, but it's also important to then come back and integrate, not to belabor the discussion, but, you and I had talked about this conversation I had the other day about self-love. Somebody had told me, everybody is so focused around self-love right now. Self-love, you need to love yourself. You need to do all these practices that take care of yourself, right? And they believed that was pushing people away from being loving towards others, that it was actually making them selfish.
Right.
So my argument was, well, you have to understand that self-love practices were really birthed out of an idea or a self-identification that people were in self-hatred. And so they needed something to counter the space that they were in order to move out of it, right? And that's the same thing with the feminine practice. And so I said, it's not about getting rid of self-love. It's about understanding that you move into a place of self-love so that you can be a more loving presence in the world, right? And that then you, in turn, move to love others, right? But all of that comes from doing the practices in a place of an open heart. If your heart is closed, you're in survival. You're thinking about about you, right? You're thinking about, where you're going to land. If your heart is open and you're in a space of love, then you naturally take into account those around you, right? And what is happening in, let's say, for me, like what's happening in the field, right? What's happening as a full experience, not just, inside my own skin. Right. So, and I think it's hard to live a life completely open-hearted 100% of the time. It's a constant practice, just like it's a constant practice to be at a high level of consciousness, right? Which they go together. So that's not to judge anybody, but it's just to say that I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Ever. But I think depending on where you're at on your journey, and I talk to this with a lot of people too, where you're at will depict where your next step is. Obviously, you have to get at a certain level before you can get. And so many people want to get to, and I'm just going to use you as an example because you're sitting right there. They want to get to the level you're at, but they're at this level, and you can't get from there to here. You have to make all the little adjustments and corrections. I was telling somebody the other day, because they were watching they were doing a video YouTube, I don't even know what she called it, but she's like going through all my YouTube, and it's like, oh no, please don't do that. And she was like, you kind of contradict yourself, like this video over here and then this video. I was like, you have to understand the progression that you're watching.
Yes.
You're not just watching like these things that I'm telling you, you're literally watching my lifeline progression from wherever I started those videos, which was in illness and in autoimmune disease and all the stuff I was struggling to get out of, all the way up to where I am right now. And wherever that is going to go to wherever it's going to go to next. But you're watching a progression, and whatever I said 2 years ago might not match what I'm doing right now. It could be different, but it still might resonate for somebody who's on the journey and hook in at that point and go, oh, that's the thing. But the thing is never the thing. There's always that next step. And so finding that balance between all of this stuff becomes so important. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, I mean, it's true. And I think we've talked about this before, the idea that, at each level of consciousness, truth kind of opens itself up, right? And so the idea of what you believe to be true expands, and it adjusts because you now have a greater awareness. Right. So it seems natural that would happen. And oftentimes that awareness is hard to translate in a way that maybe somebody, let's say, 4 rungs behind you, will fully grasp. And so they'll maybe get a piece of it, but it'll help, elevate them in a different way. And so depending on where you are coming into the conversation, any of those pieces can be helpful and valid, but it's really about keeping your mind open and objective and not honing in on one idea and saying that's going to be the be all and end all forever. I'm gonna plant my flag in this idea and what this is, and that's it, because it might be true right now. Like it could be 100% your experience and truth in this moment, right? And as you develop and change and become a new person and you get new awarenesses and you You understand things on maybe 3 additional levels. You go, oh, wow, I can see where that idea might have been limiting. And it's actually, the border is actually way out here, you know?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I always try and remind myself to pay attention after I blink.
After you blink?
Oh yeah, blink. It's going to change.
Oh.
Blink. Wait for a second, blink, and then see what happens next, because it never stays the same. It
Well,
always.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
you.
you.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I think it's important to say this really quick, is that I realize how everything I just said could feel overwhelming for somebody. And they could say, well, then how do I ever really know what's true? And my answer to anybody that I talk to, anybody I work with, is to develop what your resonant truth is.
Yeah.
That's my new favorite term, is resonant truth, right?
Resonant truth.
So for you, I think it would be like your full body yes, right? Is that true? Okay. So because that will tell you, right, what is the most in alignment for you, where you are, and what's happening right now, right? That is the thing that you steer your life by. So don't do it by what I'm saying. Don't do it by what Christy said.
No, I can always find yourself.
Don't do it by anybody else. Like, bar none, develop that tool and then trust that tool no matter what. And that will guide you, to the best place you can possibly be, to what the truth of your soul essence is. And that's really what you want anyway, right?
Yeah, you have to. That resonant truth idea is that's so good. And I know people, I was actually working with a gal this morning in Thailand. She's a yoga instructor over there. A crazy cool conversation, but she was just learning how to muscle test doing these kind of things. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to get her to feel and hear so she could get the difference and know it. She's like, at the end of the conversation, and I'm not sure kind of the path everything had taken, she was just like, it's so bizarre knowing you can feel inside yourself. And she goes, I was literally about to leave here to go to a Reiki healer to have her muscle test just so I could check my muscle test to see if the answers were the same.
Oh my gosh.
And then she's sitting here feeling it in her heart, and she's like, there's no denying this. She's like, that is a strong, powerful, but she was looking for it out here. And then she was going to go test it against somebody else's ability to do this. And I was like, oh, here, let's go this first and then go do that and see what happens. That could be an interesting experiment. Like, go, so I always come back here, come back to the source, come back to literally source energy moving through you and see what answers you get.
Because when you know that you know that you know, you can feel it. Mm-hmm. Like, nothing can shake you. You know what I mean? Like, you'll feel so solid in what you think and what you decide in a open-hearted, soft way. That it's a beautiful guidepost.
Yes.
It's one of, I think, my greatest treasures to be able to feel that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Me too. Definitely. Because before it was a train wreck. So.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, there is that. Sure. All right. Blessings and peace to you. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I appreciate more than words will ever be able to say. There you go. All right. Well, I'll be curious to see where this all takes you, and standing in the presence of Mother Mary and just being in that space and what all that does for you. That's going to be a fun thing to be able to watch and see you explore as you move through time. It'll be very fun actually to watch. So, but we're going to cut out on here. I thank all of you guys for being here. Whoever's seen this, leave comments below if you have questions, and I'll field them back towards Zerina if they're for her. Otherwise, I just want to bless your existence, because I am so excited every time I get to talk to you. I am just always in awe of things you're doing, and your abilities and talents and spirit within you always shows up so full front that it just always knocks me over. So thank you for being here with us today. Of course.
Thank you too.
Very welcome. All right, and we will see everybody else again soon.